Betrayal rarely announces itself with noise. Most of the time it arrives quietly, disguised as ambition, necessity, or opportunity. A man convinces himself that loyalty is flexible, that honor can be negotiated, and that money is powerful enough to erase consequences. In the world of Don Vito Corleone, that belief was the most dangerous mistake anyone could make. This story is not about a gunshot in a dark alley or a body sinking into the river. This is about something far more unsettling. It is about a man who believed he could betray the Godfather and survive, and in a sense, he did. But what followed him afterward was a punishment so calculated, so precise, that death would have been merciful in comparison. If you are watching this from Mexico, the United States, Colombia, Argentina, or anywhere else where power, loyalty, and respect still mean something, stay with this story until the end. And before we continue, write in the comments what betrayal means to you. Is it weakness, ambition, fear, or simply human nature? In the shadows of New York, where favors were currency and silence was protection, Don Vito Corleone built his empire not on chaos but on order. He believed that violence was a tool of last resort. True power, in his eyes, was restraint. It was the ability to sit calmly while others panicked, to speak softly while others shouted, and to decide a man's fate without ever raising his voice. The man who betrayed him knew this. He had sat at his table. He had been protected by his name. He had benefited from the invisible shield that came with being associated with the Corleone family. Doors opened for him. Enemies hesitated. Allies trusted him without question. All of that came not from his own strength but from proximity to Don Vito's power. And yet, temptation arrived. A rival family, eager to weaken the Corleones without triggering open war, offered him something seductive: money, independence, and the illusion of importance. They whispered that Don Vito was aging, that his methods were outdated, that loyalty was an old-world idea in a modern, ruthless business. They promised him a future where he would answer to no one. He accepted, not with drama, not with a bold declaration. He betrayed quietly, passing information, redirecting influence, and subtly undermining trust from within. He told himself it was temporary, that once he secured his position, he would be untouchable. He believed Don Vito would never find out, and even if he did, he assumed the response would be immediate and violent. That assumption was his second mistake. Don Vito Corleone always knew. He knew not because of spies or intercepted messages, but because betrayal leaves a trace. A hesitation in speech, a shift in loyalty, a silence where there should be commitment. Don Vito understood men better than they understood themselves. He watched, he waited, and he said nothing. When the moment came, there was no confrontation, no threats, no raised voices. The traitor was invited once more into Don Vito's presence. The atmosphere was calm, respectful, almost warm, and that was when the punishment began. Don Vito did not accuse him, he did not expose him publicly. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He withdrew trust. Slowly, methodically, without explanation. Favors stopped coming. Introductions were delayed. Promises were never confirmed nor denied. The man found himself still alive, still free, but suddenly alone. The protection he once enjoyed evaporated without anyone acknowledging it. People who once greeted him warmly now kept their distance. Meetings ended quickly. Opportunities disappeared. At first he blamed bad luck. He did not yet understand that Don Vito had decided something crucial. This man would not die. He would be allowed to live long enough to feel the full weight of what he had lost. His reputation would decay. His authority would be questioned. His name would become a liability instead of an asset. In the Corleone world, this was the ultimate sentence. Because power is not taken, it is granted. And Don Vito had taken it back. And as the traitor struggled to regain control, unaware that every path forward was being quietly closed, the true nature of his punishment began to reveal itself, and it would follow him for the rest of his life. If this story is speaking to you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. What hurts more, losing your life or losing everything that gave your life meaning? As weeks turned into months, the man began to realize that survival alone meant nothing without relevance. He was still breathing, still walking the same streets, still conducting business, but something essential had vanished: respect. And without respect, every conversation became fragile. every agreement uncertain, every handshake suspicious. He tried to compensate with force. He raised his voice where he once whispered. He demanded where he once negotiated. But power does not respond to desperation. It exposes it. The more he tried to assert authority, the more people sensed weakness. And in this world, weakness is an invitation. Don Vito never interfered directly. He never issued an order. He never needed to. His silence did the work for him. Everyone understood what silence from the Godfather meant. It meant distance. And distance in this world was fatal to influence. The rival family that had seduced the traitor with money quickly lost interest. They had used him for what they needed and now saw him for what he was, a man capable of betrayal. And if he could betray Don Vito Corleone, he could betray anyone. Trust evaporated on both sides. He was no longer protected by loyalty, nor trusted by ambition. Slowly, his name became poison. Associates avoided being seen with him. Old allies invented excuses. New partners demanded guarantees he could no longer provide. Every negotiation felt like standing on unstable ground, unsure of when it would collapse beneath his feet. At night, paranoia replaced confidence. He slept lightly, listening to every sound, not because he feared death, but because he feared humiliation. He feared becoming invisible, and worse, becoming irrelevant. This was the genius of Don Vito's punishment. Death ends suffering. Disgrace extends it. Don Vito understood that a man's identity is not built on money alone. It is built on recognition, on knowing where he stands in the hierarchy of respect. By stripping the traitor of that position, Don Vito forced him into a slow erosion of self. He was alive but no longer someone. And yet the most painful part had not even arrived. One afternoon, the man received word that Don Vito had spoken his name. Not in anger, not in accusation, but in dismissal. A simple sentence delivered through intermediaries. He was no longer considered relevant to any serious discussion. In that moment, the man understood the full weight of his sentence. He was not an enemy. Enemies mattered. He was not a threat. Threats were addressed. He had become something far worse. He had become insignificant. In the Corleone philosophy, insignificance is exile without borders. A man still walks among others, but without influence, without voice, without consequence. He exists, but he does not count. This realization broke something inside him. He began to chase approval desperately, offering favors no one requested, information no one needed, alliances no one wanted. Each attempt only reinforced his position at the margins. People saw him coming and prepared excuses before he even spoke. Don Vito, meanwhile, remained unchanged, calm, reserved, focused on family, legacy, and balance. He had not destroyed a man physically. He had dismantled him socially, psychologically, existentially. Because Don Vito believed something deeply. Violence creates martyrs, but silence creates ghosts. And the traitor was becoming one. But fate was not finished with him yet. Because there is a final stage to this kind of punishment. One that does not come from the Godfather himself, but from the world the man once ruled. And when that stage arrives, it forces a choice that reveals whether a man truly understands the cost of betrayal, or whether he will pay it again. Time did what no enemy ever could. It exposed him. Without protection, without alliances, without a name that carried weight, the man became vulnerable to the smallest pressures. Minor disputes turned into serious threats. Business disagreements escalated because no one feared the consequences of crossing him anymore. The invisible shield that once surrounded him was gone, and the world sensed it immediately. Men who once lowered their eyes now stared directly at him, some with curiosity, others with quiet contempt. They did not attack him openly. That would have required courage. Instead, they tested him, slowly, relentlessly. A delayed payment here, a broken promise there, each act small enough to deny but heavy enough to humiliate. He protested, he argued, he reminded them of who he used to be. But the past has no authority in a world that only respects the present. Every time he tried to invoke the Corleone name, silence followed. The name no longer protected him. In fact, it now worked against him. People heard it and wondered why someone so closely associated with Don Vito was suddenly so powerless. The question itself was dangerous. Questions lead to conclusions, and conclusions spread faster than truth. Rumors began to circulate. Not accusations. Those would have been too obvious, but doubts. Subtle suggestions that he had fallen out of favor, that he had made a mistake, that he had crossed a line no one was allowed to cross. In this world, doubt is enough to kill opportunity. The man started to understand something far more terrifying than death. Isolation is not the absence of people, but the absence of meaning in their presence. He was surrounded, yet alone, seen, yet ignored, alive, yet erased. He considered leaving, starting over somewhere else. But power does not travel well. Without reputation, without backing, he would simply become another man with a story no one believed. And worse, a man running looks guilty even when he is not. Don Vito knew this too. That is why he never chased the traitor away. He allowed him to remain exactly where his failure was most visible, among people who remembered who he once was, and who he was no longer allowed to be. The man began to replay the moment of betrayal in his mind. Over and over, he tried to justify it. He told himself he had been practical, smart, modern, but deep down, another truth emerged, one he could no longer escape. He had misunderstood power. He believed power was independence. Don Vito knew power was belonging. By betraying the family, he had not freed himself. He had orphaned himself, and orphans in this world do not survive for long, not physically, but spiritually. The weight of that realization crushed him more than any threat ever could. His confidence collapsed inward. His voice lost firmness. His decisions became reactive instead of strategic. Fear replaced vision, and fear, once visible, invites predators. Still, Don Vito did nothing. That was the most unbearable part. No punishment announced, no sentence declared, no closure offered. The man was forced to live inside uncertainty, wondering if this was all, or if something worse still waited ahead. Because deep down he sensed the truth. This was not the end of his punishment, this was preparation. And soon the world would force him into a moment where he would have to confront the final consequence of betrayal, not through violence, not through loss of life, but through a choice that would define how he would be remembered, if he was remembered at all. The moment arrived quietly, as all decisive moments do. A conflict erupted between two minor factions, neither powerful enough to dominate the other, but both desperate for legitimacy. In another time, they would have come to him seeking mediation, knowing that his word once carried weight. Now, they came for a different reason. They needed a scapegoat, a name to blame, a figure whose fall could absorb the damage and restore balance. They chose him. He was summoned, not with respect, but with expectation. The tone was different. No formalities, no courtesy, only pressure. They demanded that he take responsibility for decisions he had not made, for failures he had not caused, and for the first time, he realized something chilling. No one would defend him. He tried to negotiate. He tried to reason. He tried to invoke logic and fairness. But logic has no value when power has already shifted. They were not interested in truth. They were interested in closure. And he was convenient. This was the final test Don Vito had foreseen. Not because he orchestrated it, but because he understood human nature. When a man loses protection, the world eventually asks him to pay for it. He was offered a choice, not explicitly, but clearly. Accept the blame quietly, and preserve what little dignity he had left, or resist and be crushed completely. Either way, his fate would confirm what everyone already suspected. He was alone. In that moment, he understood the full architecture of Don Vito's punishment. There was no revenge, no anger, no satisfaction, only consequence. By removing him from the structure of loyalty, Don Vito had exposed him to the raw mechanics of the world, a world where power is borrowed, never owned, where protection is conditional, where status exists only as long as others agree to recognize it. The man chose silence. He accepted the blame, knowing it would erase him entirely. His name would be spoken only in cautionary whispers. His story would become a lesson, not a legacy. And as he walked away from that final negotiation, something inside him collapsed permanently. Not his body, his identity. Meanwhile, Don Vito continued his life unchanged. Family dinners, quiet conversations, careful decisions. The balance of power restored without a single act of violence. The traitor was not destroyed by the Godfather's hand. He was destroyed by the absence of it. That was the true punishment. Because Don Vito believed something that few men ever understand. When you kill someone, you end their story. When you remove their place in the world, you force them to live inside its ending. And that ending was now inevitable. The man faded from relevance, from memory, from consequence. He lived, but his life carried no weight. He existed, but his existence no longer mattered to anyone who shaped events. And yet, the lesson of his fall did not disappear with him. It traveled quietly, embedded in the behavior of others, in the way men measured their loyalty, in the caution with which they spoke, in the understanding that betrayal might spare your life, but it will never spare your soul. And that understanding leads us to the final truth Don Vito Corleone lived by, a truth that explains why his power endured long after his enemies vanished. Don Vito Corleone never needed to explain his philosophy. He lived it. Every decision, every silence, every measured word reflected a belief older than violence and stronger than fear. Power to him was not the ability to destroy, but the ability to decide who mattered. The man who betrayed him learned this too late. He lived many years after his fall, but those years were empty of influence. He watched others rise, negotiate, command rooms where he was no longer invited. He became a witness to a world he once helped shape, now moving forward without him. That was his sentence. Not pain, not blood, but irrelevance. In the end, no one celebrated his survival. No one mourned his decline. He became what Don Vito had intended from the moment he recognized the betrayal, an example of what happens when a man confuses opportunity with permission, when he mistakes access for authority, when he believes that money can replace loyalty. Don Vito understood that fear fades, violence provokes retaliation, but lessons endure. And this lesson spread quietly through the world he controlled. Men became more careful with their words, more respectful of agreements, more aware that betrayal did not always bring immediate consequences, but it always brought permanent ones. The Corleone power was never about intimidation alone. It was about structure, about knowing that every man had a place, and that place was protected as long as honor was respected. Once that line was crossed, protection was not violently withdrawn. It was simply removed, and removal in this world was fatal to meaning. Don Vito also knew something deeply human. Men fear humiliation more than death. Death is quick. Humiliation is remembered. It lingers. It reshapes identity. It forces a man to confront his own insignificance day after day. That is why the punishment was worse than death. The traitor was not granted the dignity of an ending. He was forced to live inside the consequences of his choice. To wake up every morning aware that his name no longer opened doors, that his voice no longer carried weight, that his presence no longer altered outcomes. And so, the story of Don Vito Corleone is not truly about crime or violence. It is about understanding people, about knowing when to act and when not to, about realizing that the most absolute form of power is the ability to walk away and let the world do the rest. Because in the end, Don Vito did not need to punish the man directly. He simply let him live without honor, and that was enough. Honor sustains power, character sustains legacy, and men who truly understand strength never need to prove it. They simply remain.